Hi everyone, this is Dr. Nitin Chod, and in this video, I'm going to talk to you about the potential danger to the US economy, and I'm going to analyze a recent interview with the White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow. And I'm actually going to compare that interview with something that Larry Kudlow himself said 4 months ago before all of this happened. I'm going to analyze his past and his present comments, and I'm going to tell you what I think, what I read between the lines. Number two, I'm going to talk about what the data is telling us. There are some new economic indicators that are now emerging that are actually giving us inside information about what's going on in the economy and whether we are on the road to recovery. So make sure you watch this video all the way through to the end so you'll get a clear picture of what's going on. And finally, I'll talk to you about what lies ahead and how you can prepare yourself for what lies ahead and how you can recover from this situation. Now, I'm going to compare Larry Kudlow's most recent, a brand new interview with an interview that he gave at the start of the year before this pandemic began. Now, in all fairness to him, he does not have a crystal ball, but what I'm trying to tell you is that we can have the best advisors, we can have the best policy makers, but the challenge, the danger to the US economy was and is very hard to predict, because if you look at Larry Kudlow's comments, he did say at the start of the year, this is a human tragedy, it is not going to be an economic tragedy, and we all know how that turned out. It ended up being both. Let's take a look at his most recent interview and try and read between the lines.
We have seen more cases out there. I know part of that's because we're doing more testing, but a higher percentage of those tests coming back have been coming back with more positive results in some places too. What do you think?
Actually, I think nationwide, Becky, the positivity rate is still quite low. Well under 10%. Now, I do agree. The numbers quoted to me by the health people, I'm not the expert, they are. Over the weekend, there are 37 states that have virtually no problems. There are 13 states that do have hot spots. But on the other hand, Becky, just to balance it out, I'm looking at this Colorado down 30%. Here, the Washington, D.C. metro area down 31, Illinois down 36, Massachusetts down 27, Michigan, that's really something, they're down 80% on case rate.
As you can see, what Larry Kudlow is saying is that things are getting better across the country. In his opinion, there is no second wave, there are simply hot spots. So what he's talking about is a general improvement in the number of cases throughout the country. So now the administration definitely would want to project that they have the situation under control and they want to put a positive aspect to what's going on. But depending on where you live, you could either be doing very well or you could disagree with Larry Kudlow completely, because this situation is going in waves throughout the country. Some states are doing much better than others.
There is no second wave coming. It's just, hot spots. They send in CDC teams. We've got the testing procedures. We've got the diagnostics. We've got the PPE. And so I really think it's a pretty good situation. Fatality rates, incidentally, continue to decline. Looking at the 1-day and 7-day fatality rates, less than 0.5%, even while, as you noted, cases have gone up in some places. So all in all, I think it's a pretty good situation. And of course, reopening the economy is the key to economic growth.
This is the important part. As I mentioned in other training videos, the Republicans want to reopen the economy, want businesses to hire employees back. They want to put an end to unemployment benefits or encourage individuals to get back to work. The idea is to get the economy back on track. The idea is to get individuals back to work again. And this is the same message that Larry Kudlow has talked about before. I have done other training videos about that. But what's interesting here is that the administration is looking at specific data, specific medical data that's helping them guide their decision makings. That is a good thing, because at the end of the day, you want to let the data guide your decision making. And even though you may say, well, what's an economic advisor doing talking about medical data? We are in a situation where we need to look at the data in order to make informed decisions about what to do next with the economy, with the stimulus checks. Speaking of stimulus checks, if you looked at my most recent video, you'll see that President Trump basically announced and committed to a second stimulus package, and he did say that it was going to be released in the next couple of weeks. So you definitely want to go ahead and check that video.
We spoke with Scott Gottlieb earlier today, the former head of the FDA, and his point is that in some of these states where you are seeing hotspots, it's a lot of the younger people ages 30 and younger, who are getting it at this point. Would you be in favor of shutting down potentially some of the bars or slowing things down just so that things don't get out of hand?
I think that sort of thing is up to the individual states, the governors. in some cases, the mayors. Scott Gottlieb is a dear friend and a brilliant guy. I'm sure he told you how important it is to maintain best practices, social distancing, where applicable. Again, it's voluntary, but where applicable, face masks.
This is also extremely important because the basic philosophy, the basic approach of the administration has been to let the states make their own decisions. Some states are being extremely conservative. Some states are being a little bit more ambitious, a little bit more aggressive in reopening faster. And so there is some disagreement between the states and the administration. But at the end of the day, what Larry Kudlow is saying is that the states make their own decision and the states can then create their own mandates. The states can decide whether social distancing, whether face masks are essential or not.
And again, get testing where possible. I'm not going to advocate shutting down any place, just if that's what the locals think is necessary. But again, the costs of shutdown in economic terms, in psychological terms, in addiction terms, I mean, we've learned a lot since last February. We're in a position now, we're going to come on much stronger in this recovery than a lot of folks thought, maybe than we thought here. And, you know, there's been a whole bunch of green shoots on retail sales, on employment, on new business applications, on travel and Apple mobility indexes. Housing demand is strong. Auto demand is strong. This is great stuff. The employment was up 3 million in May. The early estimates are about 3.5 million new jobs in June. That comes out July 2nd. And the temporary layoffs and furloughs, folks are going back to work. So I think the rescue package was solid, and I think the economic numbers are coming on great.
As you can see, Larry Kudlow talked about the economic, the psychological, and the addiction impact of this entire shutdown. The Republicans want us to get back to work as quickly as possible. I have done other training videos asking where are the jobs, because at the end of the day, this is a human problem. This is an emotional problem. This is a financial problem for all of us in the trenches, for all of my subscribers watching the video. But as an economist, as a White House economic advisor, he's talking about getting back to work, and his exact words were, let the locals decide.
If that's what the locals think is necessary.
As an economic advisor, Larry Kudlow's primary responsibility is to keep an eye on the economics of the situation, on helping people stay in their jobs, on making sure the economy is humming along, making sure people are employed, making sure people are spending money. That is his primary responsibility. In fact, because of this responsibility, he was interviewed at the start of the year, and let's take a look at this interview. It's extremely interesting. This interview was conducted on the 25th of February. And he was asked some specific questions about whether this could really get dangerous, whether it could impact the country economically. So in all fairness to Larry Kudlow, he didn't have a crystal ball. He wasn't able to predict what was going to happen. But it's very interesting what he said. And that's why I think that fundamentally, the best economic plans, the best ideas, the best minds, whether you agree with them or not, and again, for me, it's not about the red or the blue, it's about the red, white, and blue. The fundamental principle here is the best minds can often be wrong. Let's take a look.
Man, Larry, they are going to be leading the news. They already are. Here's how Politico says it. Politico says, Larry, quote, this sounds really, really bad. They quote the New York Times.
Let me emphasize again, this interview was done on the 25th of February, before all of this happened.
Coronavirus will spread to communities in the U.S., the CDC warned Tuesday. Dr. Nancy saying it's not so much a question of if this will happen, but a question of when. They're warning Americans for significant disruption to their daily lives, Larry.
As far as the U.S. is concerned, when you look at this, I mean, you have a little higher head count on the infections because of the cruise ship people coming off. We have contained this. I won't say airtight, but pretty close to airtight. We've done a good job in the United States. Hats off to our public health people. And the other generic point, and I hope we'll explore this, Kelly, is simply this. This is a human tragedy. There's no question, particularly in China. Human tragedy with, you know, thousands of deaths. God look over them. Terrible. And that's the worst part of this. The business side and the economic side, I don't think it's going to be an economic tragedy at all.
So you heard it from Larry Kudlow. I don't think this is going to be an economic tragedy at all. Now, he did talk about the human tragedy aspect of this. And again, this is one of those situations where medical data essentially blends with economic data. Larry Kudlow is not a medical expert. He is an economic expert, and his job was to make sure there was no economic impact. In other words, that there should not be an economic tragedy. And he felt fairly confident before all of this happened that there would be no economic tragedy. What did he say in his most recent interview? He said in his most recent interview that things are recovering. We are getting back on track, and we should be able to recover fairly quickly, and we should be able to get back on track. So take it for what it's worth. But again, like I said, no one has a crystal ball. What is the exact danger to the US economy? We'll have to wait and see. Let's listen to what else Larry Kudlow had to say back at the start of the year.
At the moment, Kelly, the numbers that we're looking at on all these Federal Reserve regional ISMs, today's consumer confidence number, there's no supply disruptions yet. It may be out there. I don't want to negate it. I'm just saying all I can do is look at the numbers.
Yeah, and
numbers are saying the U.S. is holding up nicely.
So you can see that the interview is actually sounding the alarm on how bad this could get. And the White House economic advisor seems fairly confident that things are under control. There were early red flags, there were early indications that things could be bad. But with that being said, the World Health Organization also said that, this wasn't going to be as bad as it ended up being. So again, there were a lot of conflicting reports at that moment in time. Again, hindsight is 2020. It's easy to second guess someone when you have the benefit of history on your side. But we now know so much more than we did back at the start of the year.
The U.S. gets 74% of its acetaminophen from China, 95% of its ibuprofen, 80% plus of antibiotics from China. A construction worker, a neighbor of mine, couldn't get a face mask this morning already. Now that these headlines are out there, all of those shortages are going to get worse, aren't they? And the economic impact is now going to start to grow.
Well, Kelly, I think you're making a lot of assumptions there, with all due respect. And we will see, with respect to supply chains, the availability of pharmaceuticals and other forms of equipment. I know there are issues there, and I accept that. I think we can deal with those issues at a later time when the emergency passes, as it will. But I'm not at all convinced that we can't get hold of what we need here in the U.S. We have stockpiles. We also have the capacity to produce more in all these areas. Look, I don't want to sound heartless or cruel or anything. This is a human tragedy. It's mostly centered in China. There is contagion elsewhere, Italy, Iran. I think that's what's upset the market. So I understand that.
Right.
I would say, number one, the head of the World Health Organization today said, let us not overreact. I think that's an important point.
Notice that he said that it's mostly contained in China, and the head of the World Health Organization said, let's not overreact. And Larry Kudlow says one more thing that's interesting.
All I'm capable of doing, Kelly, and I may not be right here, but I will say this. Based on the numbers we know, GDP, Atlanta Fed GDP now is 2.6% for Q1. That could change, but that's what we know through February 19th. All these regional Federal Reserve ISM reports, they're not hearing chatter about the virus, and there is no evidence yet of any supply disruptions. That could change. Yeah, I appreciate that. But I can only go on the facts of what I know. That's all I can do.
So, in a sense, almost everyone got it wrong back at the start of the year. No one really saw this coming. Should we have seen this coming? Should we have been more vigilant? Could we have done more to prevent this? That's a question for another day. I can talk to you about what we should do here and now. I can tell you that the hardest hit industries have been restaurants, travel, hotels, and entertainment. In fact, these industries employ most of the low-wage earners and the middle-income earners. And economic indicators are emerging that indicate that these industries are gradually starting to recover. How fast will those jobs now start to come back in your city, in your county? It depends on your state. Each state is recovering at a different rate. Each state has a different infection rate. Each state has different social distancing guidelines and different guidelines about which businesses are allowed to reopen. On top of that, when businesses reopen, they have their own guidelines on how they'll get workers back to work, how they'll open their business, how they'll start interacting with customers. And that's why I'm going to link you to a couple of articles in the description, which will give you a sense of exactly where your state is in the process of recovery. I'm actually going to cover this in a bit more detail in the next training video. I'm going to talk about 5 economic indicators that will give you a precise idea of where we are with the economic recovery. So definitely subscribe to the channel. Please click notifications so you can get instant updates. And if you learned something new from this video, please click the like button. That really helps out the YouTube algorithm. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.